and we'll design one of your, either we start with an application or sometimes start with a service. And then we import that into the CMDB so you can see what it looks like, see how it helps you in your incident process. And then we'll go into the operate. So we'll be able to show you that model inside. So I'm going to show you kind of a structure of that. And we're going to do a little bit of this workshop today, just so you'll understand the parts of the common service data model. But we're not going to be able to finish the whole thing. So I'll kind of show you the premise where we go through each of the domains, and we could show you how to build out the different pieces in the different domains so that you'll understand, one, the personas that build them, and two, the tooling that's used to push the data into each area. Okay, so before we start, there's some people on here that might still be like, what the heck is the CSDM? And a lot of times when we do this workshop, it's not to build something that you're going to take into production right away. We're usually running these workshops to build for understanding. So a lot of times what they're doing is you're taking something that's to a point where you can explain it to a larger group of people. And what we start out is with this picture on the screen, which is the most important. I heard this thing at the beginning of my career from Gartner, and I still say it to this day. It's 70% people, 20% process, and the last 10% is the tool you use. A lot of people get that backwards and think the tool's going to do everything. But the people that are around the circle are the most important part, because each domain, these people have different perspectives on the service or the product that you're building. So if you think about the design domain, the enterprise architect and the application owner, their job is to buy applications, right? They go out and they buy apps, or they say, this thing is so special for our business that we're going to build it ourselves, right? So the organization expresses a need for something, and then they have to go ahead and procure for that need. But when they procure it, it doesn't do anything yet. It's just something they bought because it's able to do something. They have to give it to the build team, and that build team has to turn it into something useful. Right? They're the ones that will configure it. So if you think about it, even ServiceNow, just buying ServiceNow gets you nothing, right? Until you give it to that build team that connects it to your Active Directory and brings your groups and does all the things you need to do. So that build team is the team that really turns it into something useful, but they can't operate because they're dependent on the operations team. The operations team has to give them an environment to develop on. They also have to give them an environment so that they can run it into production. Okay, so all these teams have to work together all the time. And then when you go into the business domain, right, this is how you can take that thing that those enterprise architects and app owners bought. This is how you turn it into something that the business can now consume. And so what the common service data model is really focused on that delivery of that service, in that way, right? Bringing it in and being able to support it. So underneath it, this is where you can start to bring, like, I try to take away a lot of the boxes and lines here, because everybody thinks that that's what's important. That's why it's really good to start with the people. So if you use that description, it at least helps people have a general understanding so that you're not right away dropping into this and it gets a little bit intimidating. But all these boxes and the connection to the boxes of relationships between them, these are all the boxes these are the tables that represent all the things that you put in so that you can build the services out. A lot of people hear CMDB, and there's two parts. I like to break it into two parts. You may choose to do it differently, but when you're going to ServiceNow, there's the part where there's this green part where it's stuff that you have to define. Nothing is going to be discovered or automated up there typically. Typically, you're going to be putting in your business applications and telling me what the business services are, and creating your catalog items and relating those together. The other part of the CMDB that people do a lot of work on is this blue part. That's where all your discovery is and your infrastructure components. So what ServiceNow does a lot of times when they say CMDB workshop, there's that blue part where it's more of the ITOM team coming in and doing a lot of that infrastructure discovery pieces. And then there's the green part, which is a lot of times run by the architecture teams. You're using impact. The architects in impact really specialize in that green area. So we like to split those two up so you can understand kind of the service side of the CMDB versus the infrastructure side of the CMDB. They're both represented in the common service data model, but they are broken up like workshop wise. All right. The problem that we're trying to solve when you say common service data model, the common in front of it. If you look at this, this is some work that I do that it's outside of ServiceNow. I work with the Open Group. They're a standards body, and they deliver the TOGAF standard. Some of you may have heard of the IT for IT standard. Well, if you look at the top line, there's 7 different things there that they use in the plan phase. So this is all planning on the top, right? The middle is all the building. So I have my CI/CD pipeline, I have my testing tools, my deployment, my service monitoring. And then on the bottom, this is all the stuff that's in your run phase when you're operational, a lot of the things that are used in the operational delivery of the services. What's interesting about all these things is they all have definitions of products, services, and applications. So when we say common service data model, what we're trying to do is at least get some of these areas to look at the same services and the same applications and the same products. And so we're trying not to say that everybody's working from a different sheet of music because they're in that tool that has their own application definition or their own service definition. So if you think about it, a lot of people say, oh, we're not doing this type of modeling today. We're not doing like application portfolio management or service portfolio management. If you're saying you're not doing it, you're probably doing it at least 15 different times in different ways. Your monitoring team's doing it. Your enterprise architecture team is doing some type of modeling. And so you may think you're not doing it, but a lot of times in these other tools, you're doing it without knowing it, right? You're creating all these models already. It's just that everybody doesn't agree on what they are. Everybody has a slightly different name for them. So that's one of the big problems we're trying to solve with the common service data model.
Hey, John, there's a good question here. It's from an IT for IT perspective, do you consider deployment services, security services, and infrastructure services also part of the business services consume domain?
The business service consume domain. So would they all have a perspective on what's being delivered, you mean? Is that who asked that? You come off mute.
Hey, hi, John. Thank you for taking this question. So we are moving towards a operate as a service or IT for IT model where, even IT provides a service, IT provides an outcome. So IT provides deployment services, infrastructure services, exactly what you see here. There is a deployment, there is service monitoring, there's security monitoring. Essentially, these are also outcomes that IT provides, and they use various applications, tools, and technology to provide that outcome. So would you consider these IT services also as business services, or they will purely fall under the managed technical service domain as technical services?
What you listed mostly would be, they're in the same, there's the same structure, right? There's a technical service offering and then a technical service that wraps those offerings together. So if you're not offering those, sometimes I see them in both areas. Like I've seen ServiceNow where it's a technical service because you're using it to support the applications. But I've also seen it in the business service because you offer like IT service management as a service to other areas of the business, like you're brokering it out as a service to other areas. So sometimes I've seen the ones you describe only here, and then other times I've seen it out in both domains. So offered it, like ITSM, you do it centrally in central IT because you're monitoring the applications and you provide that monitoring. But then then other areas have their own applications or their own service desk. So it could be that's in both of these areas, the technology consumer and the business consumer. So there's a lot of questions you need to ask to determine where that sits.
Which what I'd say to that, and this is Charles from ServiceNow, it's more important to recognize that they're services. They're both structured the same way. They've just basically got a different type. And so get them in as services, and that helps you do impact assessments and all the rest of that. Don't spend as much time worrying about which one it is. In general, it's like technical services are parts and pieces of apps, and they're mostly concerned with IT people are mostly concerned with them. But like, just do it. Like, get them in. Don't worry about perfection here. It's more important to have your services registered than you've agonized for months over which is which.
Good point.
So Charles, was that Charles speaking?
Yes.
Yep.
So when you say just get them in there, don't worry about what type. Like, are you saying don't worry if it's listed as an application service versus a technical service versus a business service?
So an app service is different to me because that's more readily app environments, app instances, but business versus technical service, if we go back to the main CSDM diagram,
right,
they both relate to business capabilities, though only one of the lines is drawn on this. They both have service offerings. They can both be in portfolios in reality. You see the little line going there. Like, structurally, they're virtually identical in how the system handles them. So a technical service or a business service, the biggest difference is sort of the lens or viewpoint you're looking at them from. Are you looking at it for what is the impact on the business if this thing goes down? Or are you looking at it from the viewpoint of like which apps and other services are impacted if this thing goes down? I'm simplifying a little bit there. Again, it's more important have services, have CIs mapped to services than it is that you're precisely correct in judging is it a business or technical.
okay.
Yeah, we'll do one example, and maybe that'll help clear it up a little bit.
Absolutely, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, because that's what we're going to do in the workshop. What we do is, before we get into that, that's on the next slide, but I'll just mention here another way to look at these services is if you're looking at the plan phase, when you're coming in, you have your ideas, your demands, and what you're looking at is your business portfolio. That's going to be those business services that are coming in. So the idea here is that you should, if there's an existing business service that you're providing, you should be able to plan and say, look, we can extend that business service, or we can use do another deployment of that business service. It's already in our portfolio. So we have it listed like networks services that you're talking about, or database services. So we have that business portfolio of things that we provide. And if we don't have something in there, we also have the app portfolio from which we can build those business services and add to that portfolio. So the idea here is that as you're building out the common service data model, you're building a place for your architects to look at the demand that's coming in and being able to pick the best things out of that bucket that they can use before you go buying stuff. Right? They should be able to look at that and have an accurate list of all the things that are in there. When you come down to the build part, when you're doing problem, incident, change, all the operational things, right? All those operational tasks, what you're using is you should be able to classify things against those services that are in the business portfolio. So the quicker I can identify that, hey, that's a problem with onboarding, and then, or HR, and then within HR, it's the onboarding process, right? You should be able to point to that pretty quickly and get this work attached to that service. Okay, and then I got the build and run backwards here, but I'll switch those. So this is actually the build phase down here when you're doing your stories, commits, your CI/CD pipeline. You're also attaching that work to either the digital products that create the services or the services themselves. So as we structure the model, we'll take a look and keep this in mind that the model is meant to support all of these work streams, not just one. not just the run work stream. So this is actually, I just put this together before the call. I put these labels on here. Yeah, but this is run. So that's the way it should be. So that we'll talk about, like, a lot of people think of incident right away, but we're going to talk about, we're going to think more about all those different areas as we go through this. You know, what we do in the workshop is we kind of put a blank slate up there, and we have conversations in each of these domains about what are you trying to do. So we might start out with, I'll just put one on here that's common, but we might want to start out with manage HR. And usually what this is going to be is so manage is the verb, right? That's what we're doing. We're manage HR. And that'll make sense later, but we usually use a verb down here in the service and then the service offerings. And then here we could say manage onboarding. We'll use that as an example, right? So now in order to manage onboarding, we might need an application service. So this application service here, a lot of people are using Workday these days. So let's say we put Workday prod in here. So this is actually saying this is a running instance of Workday, right? So this is a technology stack that has all the stuff underneath it. So for those of you that heard or are doing service mapping, this is the point where your service mapping starts. So Workday prod will go down and discover all the servers, the load balancers, like all the network pieces. That'll come underneath this when you're doing discovery. But this top level piece is just meant to be, there's a team that's supporting Workday prod, and I need to know who that team is. Okay. So the idea here is that, let's say we have I'm talking through this quick today, but we'll go in this in more detail when we're in the sessions. But let's say we have a tier one team gets a call and they say, we're having problems in HR. And the tier one team says, what are you having problems with? Oh, we can't onboard this employee, right? So they're able to say that in here, they're able to say onboarding is my problem. Now, what they want to do is they want to be able to say, okay, I see it's a problem. It's something going on with the application. I need to get it to the app team. So they would forward it to the Workday prod team, and then that would be like your tier two support. And then the Workday prod team might say, look, I have a team of people to take care of my operating systems. So I might have here is, I'm going to have a tech service called operating system or support operating systems, right? Because we want to do verbs here, just like we do verbs over here. So support operating systems might be a verb. And then this is a technical service. And then here you might have, yesterday I was working on, somebody had an AIX team, and then they had a Windows team. And the Workday servers that they had, or the PeopleSoft in their case, this is Windows. So now with this team here, this Workday prod team, they may have infrastructure, but they don't have somebody that does operating system support. They use this team down here that supports the operating, right? So these are more the technical teams that provide the technical services to run these applications. So it might be a database team or an operating system team like this. So that's the technical services, and they're being consumed by these application teams to run it. And so it may be that you have DNS up here, right? If this is something that needs a DNS server. So all of those technical teams that support you, so that you don't have to have a DNS expert on the Workday team, and you don't have to have an AIX expert on the Workday team. You're brokering that out to another team to do that. just like the onboarding team is saying that I use Workday to do part of my onboarding. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. A lot of people think because a lot of people that do the RN, that do all the servers and all the infrastructure and relate that up to an app service, because those people are technical, they think this is a technical diagram. But what the common service data model is, to me, is more of an organizational diagram. And so you have this person that's a tier one that's trying to say, man, this onboarding thing's broke. Who do I get it to? Right. So it may be that the Workday team, or it may be that you have another team here because it's they're trying to get access to a facility. You might even have like a facilities app. I don't know if Maximo even does that, but you might have a Maximo down here, and you look say, wow, they can't get access to that facility, that their badge isn't working. So you might have another application that you need as part of that. So the idea here is that you now have a map. That tier one person is now looking at a map saying, hey, do I send it to the Workday team or the Maximo team? Like, I should be able to do that diagnostic here to route it to the right team. So the other day we had an example where they were using Citrix, right? So a lot of times we'd come in here and we'd always go to the team that was working on Epic, and somebody might be on the call that we did this, but we had an Epic, and then Epic used Citrix for certain ones of their modules. But so we put Citrix back here as an application service, and we said, oh yeah, Citrix is supporting this. But then what we decided is, can we slide Citrix up here? Like, can we give this tier one person enough information to decide whether the problem's with Epic or the problem's with Citrix? So the way the organization flows today might not be how it flows tomorrow. You might want to give more enablement to this tier one so that they can get it to that tier two group quicker. And so what you're thinking here is organizationally, like, who owns this Workday product? Now, let's say I have a Workday New York and a Workday California, right? So I have two different instances and two different data centers with two different support teams. So now you have to have Workday Prod California, Workday Prod New York, right? So you need to split these because, again, it's organizationally focused, right? So if there's two teams supporting it, you need to split that into two Workday instances. Okay, does everybody get, this is the part where, like, a lot of the initial processes that we're looking at for, I'm going to just draw a line here. And let's just put another one up here. We're not going to map the other one out, but just put, let's say under manage HR, there's another thing we do besides manage onboarding. So let's say we change benefits. So what we're trying to do here is get the language that business consumer understands. So they're probably not saying, I have a problem in work. They're probably saying, hey, I'm a problem with my HR. Right. So you're trying to get that language up here that the service desk speaks to the business consumer. And then here you're trying to get the language to where this service desk knows a little bit about the operational environment. So I need to push a ticket over there, or I need, later we'll talk about change. But I need to get it over here so they can work on it. Okay, so what you can do is, the conversations are a little uncomfortable because people disagree on names or how the support structure works. But that's really what you're trying to define here is, what are the teams that support these? Now, as you come up here, there's different, you're going to have different settings for this, right? So the business application up here would probably be, I'm going to show you two of them. It might be Workday, right? Workday is the platform, but there's a platform application on Workday called, I'll call it HCM. I don't know if that's the Workday module, right? But you can split these up. Like, this might be ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow would have ITSM or CSM. So here what you're doing is you're splitting it up according to how you're paying the vendors. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're running this business application. We're running Workday on this running instance of it, but this is more of what is my compliance position up here? So that shows your compliance position. We're paying for this Workday license so we can run it on Workday prod.
Hey, John.
Yep.
So you jumped over something really important, and I wanted to make sure that I know this might be controversial, but what can you explain to me in your words what an application is? What is defined as an application to be added to the business application portfolio or representation?
Yeah, good question. So that is more about what you're buying, because you think about these people up here that are buying applications. Like I'm in design, so I need an HR capability in my organization. So I'm buying Workday and I'm buying the HCM module. So this is more of that in that design domain. You're basically listing those things that you're buying or things that your team might be building. Like if you're building your own HCM application. So anything that you're structuring in that design domain as technology you're using to derive a certain set of services or provide a certain set of capabilities, that goes up here. These are not operational. A lot of people we go in and a lot of people are doing incidents against the business application. So they're configuration items, but they're not operational configuration items. They're used more for that design aspect.
So let me ask, so in context of ServiceNow, as an example, ServiceNow would be the family of applications, and each licensable module would be a linked application underneath it.
You got it.
Yeah. And so what's that relationship between the parent and the child? I'm assuming it's parent-child. I mean, you're kind of showing it that way there. Is it platform host? Is it an application family with children applications under it? Is it in the CMDB rel CI table?
It's a reference. So these are both in the business app table. This will be and I'll show you this when I put it in, because we're going to actually put this in the database. But this is a business app. This is a business app. This is called a platform host, and this is called a platform application.
But that's what you're representing. You're not talking about a parent-child relation in the CMDB rel table.
Right. It's a reference relation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what you're representing there is that Workday has to exist in order for HCM to execute.
Yeah. Compliance-wise, right? It's like this HCM application runs on this platform. If you're going to define this as a platform application, what you said is true. You have to have that.
Right. But it's that platform host. It's the platform host, platform application relationship that we're showing there. Yeah. Because historically we've had an application family model where the idea was that these applications would inherit the information from the Workday parent down to these children and was represented in the rel table. And we've worked hard to get away from that. So I need to be able to provide clarity about what it is that you're showing here when it shows up.
Okay. Yeah, and you'll be able to go back in, like if you have an instance, a login to this instance, I'm going to put this in here so you can show it. So you should be able to take this video and then go back and walk through this. So let me just finish this, and then I'm going to start dropping it in right away so you can start seeing.
But you should also have an HCM production application, right? That an application service.
Yeah. If there's a team that's supporting HCM specifically and not just a generic Workday team. So that's a big part of the discussion, is how is that team divided? So if there's HCM and it's the same team as the Workday team and everything else, right, from the app support perspective, but other times this may sit over here as a dependency, and we might have, and that's a really good point. So we might have this sitting over here, like Workday prod.
John, are you describing in a business?
But if you put HCM stuff in Workday prod, then what's the purpose of having HCM?
Because there's a different team that you would support. You wouldn't go directly to the Workday team. There'd be like a dedicated HCM team that's providing application support specifically for the HCM.
Right.
So if those teams are different and you don't go directly to the Workday team, you would need to define this is an app service that's dependent on this this Workday team that they might escalate to.
Right. That makes sense. But the idea, I mean, I don't know why I would need an HCM business application if I didn't have an HCM application service.
Yeah, it's for the compliance piece. So if you're tracking costs and everything up here, right, but operationally, you only need to support, like there's only one big Workday team that has a specialist that's on the same team that takes care of HCM. Then operationally, you wouldn't need to represent it as two separate ones.
And
but
so
here you would.
What would you set on those CIs to identify that difference so that you could have that in your reporting or have that wherever it is so that that can be clearly defined to the owners?
On the operational
because our governance team is going to expect that every business application that exists is going to have an application service. Right? We don't have business applications that don't have application services. And in this situation, you're saying that, yes, that's a case. And I'm asking, how should I identify that in the business application so that they can differentiate and run those kinds of rules?
Yeah, there'll be a relationship down here to that, right? The business.
Yeah, but there's no relationship because you just told me HCM doesn't have a child, right? There's not an application service for it.
Well, HCM might have a child of, like, if there's only one Workday team, right? This might go right to Workday Prod. If the people are on that team.
Okay, I could see that working that way, but then it gets a little confusing. But that's better. At least you would be able to say yes, there's a service for it.
Yep.
Going back to what John said earlier, like this is mostly about people and process. And so the nuances you're getting into are of your implementation process. There are more functional and better answers, where you're driving of you've got an app service for every business app, but both versions are correct. So focus on what's solving a business purpose for you, not on trying to be absolutely perfect with the model. Like you want to be going the right direction on the model, but make it work in your processes. If your processes are working for you, by all means, charge forward with those.
The problem I have, though, is our processes don't always work for us. And then the model changes and I'm not in alignment. So I want to be alignment as close as I can to out-of-box processes. So, those discussions for me are essential, but I can have them someplace else if I need to.
Well, may I interject quickly, David? One thing I've really had helped me with that is there are what's called product views for any of the modules you have that will tell you what tables are like, hey, this one has to be here. And then I think, John, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I've kind of figured out that the rest is more what my business considers, I guess. Is that correct?
You mean product models like these, like how do you map it to change and incident, or product models?
Sorry, the product view for each of the modules within ServiceNow that states what tables they need to use on the CMDB from my CSDM standpoint. So I stick to those for our modules, but then for anything else we need, if that would help you, David, then that is more of, up to your business, I guess. Is that correct?
Yep. I'll show you some of these too. Like that is at the end of our workshop, and I'm going to put it in kind of the straw man we have here. You could do one of these workshops, like you'll have the full workshop that we talked about in the beginning. But today I'll show you a little bit of how we map it, and then a little bit of how we tie those product views you're talking about in. Okay. So let's say,
John, I have two small questions about business application. One is you mentioned
about enterprise architecture.
Hey, good morning. So we have ARB today. We'll be looking at CloudMed as well as Turquoise Hill.
Were you able to get the mute on that, Charles?
Yeah.
I'm looking to see who it is.
Okay. All right, there we go. We're good.
Okay, cool. So one is you mentioned that something that you procure or buy, you will put it under business application, but sometimes in IT companies, we still are building applications. We are building things from the scratch. That's the reality, to be honest.
Yep.
So would those that we build internally also end up in the business application table? That's one question. And second question is, sometimes the way these things are built, they are built as a part of small microservices, like front end, back end. So you'll have a front end as one whole package, back end as one whole package, and together they provide you with an application or capability. So would a front end, back end, which is separated out in the deployment process, would they become individual business application, or you just consider one whole application that provides an outcome becomes one business application?
There's a lot of yeah, there's a lot of talking that we would need to figure that out. But I think what you're talking about a little bit is who works on it. And because what this does when you define a business application, and I'm going to jump to this domain first, because there's so many questions up here. But when you build a business application, it creates a corresponding product model in ServiceNow. And that model will be listed on the application record. So what you want to do is any of the work that's going on, the team that configures HCM or Workday would have a product model that they're going to be working against to do their user stories and all their build work. So the idea here is that you have an enterprise architecture team that knows this application exists, so that when things come in, they can look at that application. And if it's a COTS application, that's fine. If it's homegrown, that has to be listed here too, because they're tracking it to make sure that they can use it in the design, right? And then over here, this is the people that are actually working on it. So is there a queue for HCM where people are doing user stories versus this queue down here where people are taking care of incidents and changes and things like that? So that's kind of that operational, like we're trying to patch all these teams together the way they work and the way they're structured. So if you do have that, and I'm going to show you in that table. So let's go drop this in, because that starts to answer some questions when we drop that in the system. So let me go to the domain first.
So we would tie licensing to the business application upper right-hand side, but we tie the servers to the instance of those applications that are in the technical services on the left-hand side. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then
the app service is what you tie all the servers to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you do that through the software product model in the business application, tie the license to it?
The software product models, are you talking about the ones that come in from SAM?
Yes, from
yes,
ITOM.
They'll map up to that business application through technology portfolio management. So the hardware and the software model should push up to that application when you have discovery.
Okay.
So it'll all be grouped. It'll roll up to the app service, all the hardware and software models, but it'll also roll up to the business application through technology portfolio management. So up in that design domain, they could do things like assess risk and do all those different.
As long as you map it, though, you have to map that model to that application, to the application service. Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry, and that's what is that relationship between the business and the service, the business application and the application service? What is that relationship?
Let's do that right now. So what I'll do is I'll go into CSDM, right? So if you're in your, I'm going to pin this. So this, and I'm building this in the app so you guys can go touch it if you want to afterwards, right? This is the one I give you the admin login to. So if we start in the design domain and we go to the business application, and these, I think everybody knows this already, but the CSDM tables are available to you with anything you purchase on ServiceNow. You don't have to purchase anything additional to get any of these tables. Right. So in the business application, if I say I have a new business app, and that business app is going to be, here we're saying it's going to be Workday. And then Workday is going to be a COTS, right? It's not a homegrown one like you asked about before, it's COTS. because we're buying it from a vendor. The architecture type, it's going to be a platform application, or a platform host rather. And then we can say this is a cloud install. So that's basically what you're doing here is you're listing this. So, and this is meant for the architects, right? This is meant for the people to say, why do we have 5 HCM solutions across our company? They're doing application rationalization. They're saying, why do we have these on-prem things when we're a cloud-first company, right? So that's all the planning stuff. You got to think this is for somebody that's designing the enterprise, right? That's really what the business application is there for. So that's when you look at all these different fields in here, you get more of that feel for a design component as opposed to like an operational view that would be more interested in all the technology that's attached to it. Okay, so when we say this one, we had a couple mandatory fields. So now I'll save this business application, and now we have Workday in there. So Workday. I'll just say for DSF, digital service, because we probably have a Workday in there. Okay, so now this is the platform host, and now I would go ahead and define another business application, and this would be, I could either Workday HCM, I'll call it, right, for a module in there, and then this one would be a COTS application because we're also buying it from a vendor. This would be a platform application, and then it's going to ask me what platform host do I run on. And here I would say that I run on the Workday platform host. So whoever asked about that reference before, that's a reference now to the platform host that it runs on. It's not in the CMDB, the rel CI table. It's actually in, it's that relationship between the two.
Okay.
Okay. So, and all these things are meant for designers. Like, I want to know what this application does. I want to know how much it costs. I want to know who owns it, like from who negotiates the contract with the vendor. So that's why I say it's more of that record. It's almost like if you think of a CI and a CI versus an asset record, right? This is more of that ownership record for the relationship with the vendor or the relationship with the team that's building it internally.
So John, so you had multiple instances of it. So you had multiple entities within the organization, and there's multiple instances of, let's say, Workday. We know that's not going to be the case. Mm-hmm. Would you also have, and you wanted to kind of consolidate that, where are my work days within my organization? Would you actually have another top level that says, here, Workday, and then you have the 2 instances of Workday that's owned by 2 different parts of the organization, and then you have the instance of the Workday as an application service underneath those? Or would you?
So what I've seen, like I've seen Workday, and then I've seen the name of the division or the department on there, because if it's related to a different contract and a different person owns it, then you need a different record. But I haven't seen those rolled up unless there's ownership across Workday. I would, they would more go out and say, like, what are all the things doing HCM, or, looking for the Workday deployments through maybe the Workday name. But there's usually not a roll up of those things unless there's somebody trying to consolidate the contracts. So you can also
that's something, John, to consider, because the business app, that vendor, you said contractor, the person that basically owns the contract for that business application, but the business application consumes the service instances. Those service instances are used by the offering. The offering has the contract field on it, and that contract field is relegated to the vendor that supports that contract on the offering. So maybe the business app exists, and then you carve that up in Workday separate offerings, different contracts, different vendors.
Really good point. Yep. So that's the way you could backwalk it through that vendor record and find all the Workday instances. That would be a good way if you're doing that consolidation.
So would you then use like the application family attribute to identify all of your Workday applications?
On the I don't know, Lou, do you use that the family attribute?
Family, the application family, the application category, the product classification, the United Nations product codes, those are all good to carve out for your application rationalization. As John mentioned earlier, how many finance apps do I have? Maybe the family of the finance category is financial management, and a product classification, United Nations code that's out of the box available is finance. So those are all good for those purposes. The platform and the platform application reference fields that Sean describes is a whole separate construct and purpose that you would use. And then what I just mentioned about the contracts on the service offerings, those two also a different, entirely separate, possibly separate purpose. Just depends on how you want to manage it.
But that's exactly what it's for, is doing things like that, rationalization, and however you rationalize it through either the family or the vendor. That's the benefits of getting a good set of records up there. So let me show you this piece here because I want to make a point on this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take a picture like of those things we defined, and I'm going to put the definitions in here so that you can see, hey, we talked about this, and then this is what it looks like inside of the product. The other part that I like to I want to just talk about this in the next 5 minutes because we spent a lot of time on this in the workshop. So when we build the services and the offerings, what we want to try to do, and the business service and offerings, right? So when we build this green domain down here, we don't want to be defining it like we did up here. So I defined it in the actual tables. Down here, you would use the service builder. Right? So if we have manage HR here is the service, we're going to want to start with that business service and then show all of the extensions of that, like the different offerings for that business service. We want to show that all together. So what you would do up here, instead of going to CSDM like I did, the people in this domain would go to Service Builder. So if you're building in this domain and you don't have Service Builder installed, you're going to want to get this installed. So what Service Builder does, it's more of a guided, and again, there's different people defining these because you're in different domains. So we're the architects defining those other parts on the business apps. The business service is more the people like your BRMs defining and modifying them, right? Together, maybe with the app team. But if I say create a new business service here, it's going to ask me, what's the name of that business service? And this is where it would start to say, okay, what are the different parameters that I need? Now, keeping in mind, this is not a design component. This is a delivery component, right? So when I'm managing HR now, this is an internal app. So it's not something I provide to my customers. And then it asks you a different series of questions, but it gives you a guide on the right to say, this is why I'm asking you these questions. So this life cycle phase, we'll talk about more next week, but there's some changes here. So catalog and operational, it wants to know who's the team that supports this, right? Who's the team that owns the manage HR piece? So there's a description of all the different ownership, because really what we're trying to establish here is accountability. Accountability at the business level, accountability at the technical level, and even the contract level. Like if there's a contract with a vendor to provide this, what are all those different teams that work together to make sure that happens?
Sure. One quick question, John. What version of ServiceNow are you on? What release is this?
I'm on Xanadu, but the Service Builder goes all the way back before Washington.
Okay.
So, but you're going to want to download this plugin. Service Builder is its own plugin now.
Okay.
Is there license requirements around that?
No, it's part of Core. It's just another plugin you have to turn on. Okay. In Service Builder now, we're going to want to put our offerings in. So manage onboarding was one of the offerings, right? So now what we're doing is we're creating those relationships without having to do them ourselves. Like if we put this in the table directly, we would have had to create all those relationships. But in the service builder, when I'm putting them in here and creating my team for the offerings and doing all the different pieces for the offerings, it's going to create all those relationships for me. So there's a builder in this domain, and then in the app services domain, there's another builder. Okay, so what we do in the workshop is we go through, and I had two of those. I had manage onboarding, and then I had change benefits. Right, so I'm going to want to put those in. And then that would let me build out the business service. The details, right, could come later, but we're going to want to enable people to come in here and make changes that aren't necessarily all going to be IT people. So they're architects up top that's putting in the data. It's more of the kind of the business delivery people that are putting data in the bottom. Okay, now the last piece that we'll define. So what we did is I'm going to put a little picture here of that, the builder, the service builder, so that you can see the workspace I used to build this. I went in here and I went directly to the CSDM model to build these. So I'm going to point you to it so that you can step through what we did. The one I'm not going to have time to show you today is the application service, but this is I will define it in here for you so that you can see what the build out of this HCM prod would look like. But in the workshop, we build all those out individually. Okay, and then the last part of the workshop we'll do is because we built these models out, we'll now be able to look at the dependency views.
Just one question for clarification. So under the service builder, that's where you build the business service and the technical service, but the application services are done separately.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify and make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, the one thing I like to do too, in these workshops, I do it, but just a rule of thumb, if you are defining all the domains, right, you want to make sure that you do this and this first, because this glues it all together. This says, hey, this is the license I'm using to deliver this application, which delivers these services to the business. Right. So when I do this, it's going to ask me, hey, which service offerings are you supporting? And then what are your business apps? So in that builder, right, it's actually drawing these lines for me in the builder without me seeing it. Like I'm not going into the rel table and manually creating those lines. So
right, because it's done when you create that application service and relate it to that business application, it does that relationship, right?
Exactly.
That builder.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And would you create a application management technical service too for the business service that you just created?
For the business service, I would not create. It depends. I kind of did that here, right? Like I have a Workday is the application. Like this HCM prod is dependent on Workday. If there's an HCM prod team,
right? But in some of the CSDM examples, there is an additional technical service for application management. So there is an application management technical service for the business service and this application services. So is that something you would create too, or that's optional?
That's optional depending on how you structure it. Sometimes it's going to be an application service in itself because people route things directly to Workday. So it has to be its own app service. So there would be a dependency on that app service. And other times there is no direct routing, right? So Workday might be a technical service because you're always going to route it to the module team first. So instead of an app service, you can have this structured as more of a technical service. So that's a conversation that you have to have. Like, how does it work in your environment, right? That's what Charles mentioned before. There's nuances for every different company. And that's why somebody says, hey, just give me the Workday blueprint and let me use it. Well, it's different in every company, right? Depending.
Yeah. I had sorry, John, if you don't mind, I had a similar conversation with customers in Ashvini. I think what I counsel the customers, resist the temptation to model everything for the sake of modeling the CSDM, because
that's a good tip.
Really, you got to be more practical. Like what you're describing, the thing is more not a technical, more of a team. I saw a comment in there that sometimes people think of a team as a service. And if it's an assignment group, like the application management is a team of people, well, you can establish that relationship through the assignment group of the CI versus having to model like an actual CI or a technical service in the CMDB. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good suggestion,
like
and I
I think it
appreciate
comes
that.
down to common sense, like what's pragmatic in your organization of how data needs to be represented in the CMDB is really how you want to guide.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. I'll show you the so that's the part of the workshop that we do is we structure each of these domains. And usually it's a 3-hour workshop. We'll structure each domain, and then we'll give you pictures of like, what does the model look like in a dependency map? What does it look like inside of DPM? Like, what are all the views that you get by virtue of doing these models? The last part we talk about is more of the roadmap for the consumption of the model data. So this is where you map it back to how do I use that model in incident management? Like, what does ServiceNow give me extra because I use CSDM? So what I'll do is I'll put this out there so that you can have kind of the roadmap conversation, because you never just want to say I'm building CSDM to resolve incidents quicker, because that'll get your CSDM project shut down. You want to say that I'm helping the incident process owner, the change process owner, I'm helping the problem process owner this way. So you want to help. The more you can help, right, the more valuable that data becomes. Even if you get into security and like business continuity, like every product in ServiceNow is somehow tying back to the CSDM. So the more you can enlist those process owners to be your friends, right, and consume the model data, the sooner you'll know if it's right, because it needs to work for each of these people. But two, how valuable it is, right? How much can we improve that process by giving them this data? So I know we're over time, and I knew I wouldn't finish all this, but I just wanted to take you through like the structure of the workshop. And sometimes it's like a train the trainer. I'm running this workshop with you because you need to run this with one of your divisions or your technical service group or your business service group. But that's the idea, right, is to get the primer here so that everybody understands what we're trying to do. Well, thanks for your time, everybody, today. And I will get this out with the video so that you can at least have the starting point to this and you can have that deck I walked through. We may have a part 2 where we complete some of the other parts that I didn't get to today.
That'd be wonderful. Thanks, John.
Thank you.